All right, folks, strap in and hold tight, because we're about to zigzag through history's darker alleys with a spotlight on the ladies who didn't just step out of line, they danced on it and sometimes set it on fire. Forget what you thought you knew about history's leading men. It's time to unveil the women who played the game of thrones, piracy, and revolution with a deck they designed themselves. From the ancient masterminds pulling strings behind empires, to swashbuckling pirates ruling the high seas, and the shadowy figures whispering in the ears of the powerful, we're diving headfirst into tales so twisted and intriguing, you'll start wondering why Hollywood hasn't called them yet. The power behind thrones. It's the 4th century BC, a time when men wore more skirts than women, and the word barbarian was a fancy way of saying, "I don't understand your accent." Into this world, we introduce Olympus, a woman who didn't just play the Game of Thrones, she practically invented it. This isn't a mere story of a mom pushing her kid to be the best. This is the tale of a woman pushing her son to conquer the known world. Olympus, hailing from Epirus, was a pretty special woman. She married King Philip II of Macedon, a guy known for loving 3 things: wine, women, and expanding his kingdom, not necessarily in that order. But it's not Phil we're interested in. It's his wife, who decided their son Alexander wasn't going to be a footnote in history. He was going to write it. How did she do it? Well, for starters, Olympus claimed that Alexander was literally the son of Zeus, which in those days was a pretty solid resume booster. Nothing says "hire me" like divine parentage. She also made sure to keep Alexander close to the action, ingraining in him from a young age that he was born for greatness, presumably while he practiced his sword fighting or did whatever princely kids did for fun back then. But it wasn't all divine claims and pep talks. Olympus was known for her political savvy and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. When Philip II got a bit too flirty with his new, much younger wife, Olympus didn't sit back and knit. No, she went full-on Game of Thrones, ensuring her rivals found themselves either exiled or mysteriously dropping dead. Philip II's assassination in 336 BC? Let's just say the jury's still out on that one, but Olympus wasn't exactly mourning in the corner. Now, with her husband out of the picture and her son on the throne, you'd think Olympus would take a back seat and enjoy the fruits of her labor. But no, she continued to be a key player in Alexander's conquests, offering advice, support, and probably sending care packages with notes like, "Remember, honey, no empire is too big to conquer. Zosho, Mom." Under her guidance, Alexander the Great didn't scribble his name in the history books. He wrote chapters. He conquered lands from Greece to Egypt to the Indus Valley, proving that with the right momager, the world really is your oyster. In the end, Olympus's story is proof of the power of maternal ambition, political cunning, and the occasional invocation of divine ancestry. She wasn't behind the throne. She was the architect of an empire, proving that in a man's world, a woman with a plan can indeed rule, or at least raise someone who does. Medieval matriarchs. Step back into the Middle Ages, where soap was scarce but drama was plentiful. Amidst this backdrop lived Isabella of France, known to her adoring fans, and there weren't many, as the she-wolf of France. Born in 1295, this wasn't your average medieval queen content with tapestry sewing and the occasional joust. Oh no, Isabella had plans, and those plans involved a hefty dose of cunning, betrayal, and a plot twist that would leave even modern-day soap operas in the dust. Married off to Edward II of England, Isabella quickly realized she had hitched her wagon to a less-than-stellar king. Edward's penchant for favoring his male companions, particularly the dashing Piers Gaveston, over running a kingdom, led to more than just court gossip. It brewed a cauldron of discontent, with Isabella stirring the pot. In 1325, fed up with being sidelined and fearing for her position and that of her son, Isabella took a trip to France under the guise of a diplomatic mission. There, instead of exchanging pleasantries, she plotted an invasion. Yes, in a move that would make Machiavelli proud, Isabella decided if you can't beat them, lead an army against them. Teaming up with Roger Mortimer, an English lord with a grudge as large as his army, Isabella sailed back to England in 1326 with a vengeance. Literally. The country was taken aback. Armies rallied to her cause, not so much out of love for Isabella, but more a mutual dislike for Edward and his favorites. Edward II's response was to do a medieval runner, a tactic as effective then as it is now. By 1327, Edward II was deposed, and history books were hastily rewritten to cast Isabella and Mortimer as the saviors of England. But as is often the case, the power duo soon found that sharing the throne was more challenging than they thought. Mortimer's influence grew, and Isabella's popularity waned. The people's love for their queen turned colder than a British summer, and whispers of her involvement in Edward II's mysterious death didn't help her Instagram follower count. Isabella's reign with Mortimer was marked by extravagance and heavy taxation, making them about as popular as a toothache. It all came crashing down in 1330, when Isabella's son, Edward III, decided he wasn't too keen on his mom's boyfriend running the show. Mortimer was arrested and executed, and Isabella was given a retirement package that included a castle and a yearly allowance. Basically, the medieval equivalent of being grounded for life. Isabella's later years were spent in comfortable confinement, a shadow of the power player she once was. The true story of Lucretia Borgia. In the heart of the Renaissance, a period marked by a flowering of art, science, and literature, political machinations thrived in the shadows of spectacular courts. Amidst this backdrop of enlightened discovery and dark deceit, Lucretia Borgia, born in 1480 in Subiaco, Italy, emerged not just as a pawn, but as a player in the dangerous game of Italian politics. Lucretia was the daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, who would become Pope Alexander VI in 1492, and his mistress Vanozza de Catane. The Borgias, originally from Spain, became one of the most influential families in Renaissance Italy. Their power derived from a combination of religious authority, strategic marriages, and, when necessary, ruthless tactics. Lucretia's early life was overshadowed by her family's ambition. Her first marriage, at the age of 13, to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro, was a political alliance designed to consolidate the Borgia family's power. However, as the political winds shifted, the Borgias no longer needed the Sforzas, and Giovanni was forced to annul the marriage on humiliating terms, accused of being impotent by Lucretia's own family. Her second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon in 1498 was part of the Borgias' efforts to ally with powerful Neapolitan nobles. Tragically, Alfonso was murdered, likely due to Cesare Borgia's machinations, as he pursued his ambitions in Italy, leaving Lucrezia a widow at 19. Lucrezia's third marriage in 1502 to Alfonso d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, proved to be more stable and politically advantageous. This alliance brought the Borgias into the circle of one of the most powerful and respected families in Italy. Lucrezia's influence grew, and she became a significant cultural patron, supporting artists, poets, and philosophers, including Aldus Manutius, a pioneer in book publishing. Despite her political and cultural achievements, Lucrezia's reputation was marred by the rumors that swirled around her family. Accusations of poisonings, intrigue, and immoral behavior were common, fueled by the political enemies of the Borgias and sensationalized by popular gossip. While no concrete evidence has ever definitively proved Lucrezia's involvement in these nefarious activities, the shadow of these allegations has lingered over her legacy. Queens of the Seas. Let's set sail from the drafty castles of medieval Europe to the sunnier, albeit no less treacherous, waters of the Caribbean. Here, in the early 18th century, where lawlessness was the law of the sea, two women defied every norm, not just by being pirates, but by being outrageously good at it. Enter Anne Bonny and Mary Read, the most feared women to ever hoist a Jolly Roger. Anne Bonny, born around 1700 in Ireland, didn't start her life with a sword in hand. Her journey from a scorned, illegitimate daughter to a pirate legend was fueled by a fiery temper and a disdain for the conventional. Seeking adventure, or perhaps just really disliking corsets, Anne joined Calico Jack's crew and quickly proved that she could plunder and pillage with the best of them. Mary Read's story takes a slightly different tack. Born in England in 1685, Mary was disguised as a boy by her mother to inherit family wealth. This early taste of cross-dressing seemed to set the tone for Mary's life. She worked on a ship, joined the British military, and eventually found her way into piracy, where she met Anne Bonny. It was on the high seas that Mary found her calling, showing a knack for sword fighting and a penchant for outsmarting the British Navy. Together, Anne and Mary became the terror of the Caribbean. Their partnership was the 18th century equivalent of a buddy cop movie. If the cops were illegal, heavily armed, and on the wrong side of the law, they were known for their ruthlessness in battle, their skill in navigation, and their ability to drink their crewmates under the table. All admirable qualities in a pirate. Their piratical career, however, was as brilliant as it was brief. In 1720, their ship was captured by the British Navy. Most of the crew, too drunk to fight, were easily overpowered, but not Anne and Mary. They fought fiercely, reportedly cursing their less-than-sober comrades for not joining the fight. Unfortunately, even the most badass pirates can't fight off an entire navy, and they were captured and sentenced to hang. In a twist worthy of a Hollywood script, both women pleaded their bellies, claiming they were pregnant to avoid the noose. The tactic worked, buying them both a stay of execution. Mary Red's story ends in prison, where she died from a fever. Anne Bonny, however, vanished into the mists of history, her fate unknown. Did she return to piracy, settle down to a quiet life, or find a new adventure? The world may never know. Leading rebellions and reigns of terror. Transitioning from the high seas to the cobbled streets of revolutionary France, let's delve into the life of a woman whose single act of defiance sparked fear in the hearts of many and secured her place in history. Enter Charlotte Corday, a figure whose name is synonymous not with ruling over empires or leading pirate crews, but with a calculated act of political assassination that would echo through the annals of history. Charlotte Corday, born in 1768 in Normandy, was not your typical revolutionary. In a time when the guillotine's blade was the arbiter of justice and the streets of Paris ran red with blood, Charlotte saw the growing chaos of the French Revolution and decided she could no longer remain a spectator. Her target? Jean-Paul Marat, a radical journalist and politician whose fiery rhetoric helped fuel the reign of terror. Marat, from his bathtub, because where else would you conduct your political business, called for the execution of thousands, believing it necessary for the revolution's survival. Corday, however, saw Marat not as a revolutionary hero, but as a monster who needed to be stopped for the greater good. On July 13, 1793, Corday gained entry to Marat's home on the pretense of providing him with a list of enemies of the revolution. As Marat soaked in his medicinal bath, Corday delivered her own version of justice, plunging a knife into his chest. Marat's death was instantaneous, and Corday's fate was sealed. Arrested and swiftly tried, Corday displayed a calm demeanor throughout her trial, fully aware of the consequences of her actions. She was guillotined 4 days after Marat's assassination, meeting her end with the same resolve that guided her hand. To the very end, she believed her act would halt the violence of the revolution. History, however, would prove otherwise. Charlotte Corday's assassination of Marat did little to quell the turmoil of the French Revolution, but her actions left an indelible mark on history. The malevolence of Mary Ann Cotton. In the midst of Victorian England's smog and shadows, where the Industrial Revolution churned and the gap between the haves and the have-nots widened, there prowled a predator in petticoats, a woman whose name would become synonymous with betrayal and murder. Mary Ann Cotton, a seemingly ordinary nurse and housekeeper, wove a web of deceit and death around her that claimed the lives of those closest to her. Born in 1832 in the small village of Low Moorsley, County Durham, Mary Ann's story is one of grim ambition and fatal solutions. Her tale is not one of theft or high-seas piracy, but of a more personal, intimate kind of villainy. Mary Ann Cotton's weapon of choice was arsenic, a deadly poison that allowed her to slip through Victorian society's cracks, leaving a trail of dead husbands, lovers, and children in her wake. Mary Ann's macabre journey began with the death of her first husband, William Mowbray, in 1865, followed by the deaths of their children. Each death brought Mary Ann insurance payouts or freed her to pursue new relationships, which invariably ended in tragedy for those who chose to share her life. In total, Mary Ann was suspected of up to 21 murders, though she was only convicted for the death of her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton. Mary Ann's modus operandi was as simple as it was horrific. She used arsenic, a common and easily obtainable rat poison at the time, to dispatch her victims, who included 3 of her 4 husbands, multiple children and stepchildren, friends, and even her own mother. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning, stomach pain, vomiting, and diarrhea were tragically common ailments in the 19th century, allowing her crimes to go unnoticed for years. Her motives were chillingly pragmatic. Each murder was a step toward financial gain, securing insurance payouts, or simply making way for the next unsuspecting victim who could provide for her. Mary Anne's ability to present herself as a grieving widow and loving mother, all while methodically planning her next kill, speaks volumes about the dualities that can exist within a person. What makes Mary Anne Cotton a figure of such enduring infamy is not just the cold-blooded nature of her crimes, but the way she exploited the vulnerabilities of Victorian society. She preyed on the need for trust and the belief in the sanctity of motherhood and marriage, twisting these institutions to her advantage. Mary Anne Cotton's eventual capture and trial in 1873 caused a sensation across England. Her conviction and subsequent execution by hanging in March 1873 were seen as a triumph of justice, but they also exposed the dark underbelly of Victorian domestic life and the ease with which poison could be used as a silent killer. The Countess of Blood. Now let's pause for a moment in the dimly lit corridors of history to recount the tale of a woman whose legend is soaked in blood and mystery. Elizabeth Bathory, known infamously as the Blood Countess. Born into one of the most prominent noble families of Hungary in 1560, Elizabeth's story is a chilling reminder of how power, when combined with madness, can lead to unspeakable horror. Elizabeth Bathory's early life gave little indication of the darkness that would envelop her legacy. Educated, beautiful, and married to Ferenc Nadasdy, a powerful Hungarian nobleman, she managed their vast estates with a firm hand. However, beneath the veneer of aristocratic respectability lurked a morbid obsession with youth and beauty, an obsession that would spiral into madness and murder. Legend has it that Elizabeth's descent into cruelty began with a simple accident. A servant girl accidentally pricked herself, spilling blood on Elizabeth's hand. Noticing that her skin seemed rejuvenated where the blood had touched, Elizabeth became convinced that bathing in the blood of young girls would preserve her youth. This macabre epiphany marked the beginning of a gruesome series of events that would earn her the title of the most prolific female serial killer in history. Over the years, Elizabeth, along with a coterie of loyal servants, lured young girls to her castle with promises of work or education, only to subject them to unimaginable tortures. The exact number of her victims remains unknown, with estimates ranging from 80 to over 600. The Blood Countess's reign of terror continued unabated until 1610, when she was finally arrested and brought to trial. However, due to her noble status, Elizabeth Bathory was never formally tried in court. Instead, she was confined to a set of rooms in her own castle, where she lived in solitary confinement until her death in 1614. The trial of her accomplices who were convicted and executed shed light on the atrocities committed within the castle's walls. Modern monsters, power, politics, and paranoia. Cut to a world transitioning from the echoes of war to the whispers of Cold War tensions, where power suits replaced crowns and the battle for supremacy was waged in the shadows. Amidst this backdrop, one woman rose to power, not with a sword, but with an iron will and a handbag to match. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. Now, before you say, but wasn't she a prime minister, not a villain? Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first female prime minister, was a grocer's daughter turned political heavyweight who didn't just break the glass ceiling. She smashed it, then used the shards to carve her policies. Thatcher was a woman of contrasts, a scientist who didn't always listen to scientific advice, a free market champion who didn't mind putting certain industries on a tight leash, and a leader both revered and reviled for her decisions. Under her reign from 1979 to 1990, Britain underwent transformational change, for better or worse, depending on whom you ask. Economic policies? Thatcher's recipe was simple: a dash of deregulation, a pinch of privatization, and zero tolerance for inflation and trade unions. The result? A mixed bag of economic recovery, flavored with social unrest and a side of widened wealth gaps. Foreign policy? She wasn't called the Iron Lady for nothing. Thatcher stood toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union, backed the controversial Falklands War, and maintained a special relationship with the US, all while keeping her handbag firmly in hand. But every tale has its shadows, and Thatcher's legacy is no exception. Her uncompromising approach earned her both admiration and animosity, making her a modern monolith in a world wrestling with change. Critics argue her policies fueled social inequality and neglected the needy, casting her as a modern monster in the eyes of those left in the wake of her political storm. So, was Thatcher a hero, a villain, or a bit of both? Let's just say she was a woman who wasn't afraid to stir the pot, even if sometimes it felt like she was using a chainsaw.